There is a distinct psychological draw to remote landmasses. When the pressures of the mainland become too heavy, humans naturally seek out isolation. We look for places surrounded by water, assuming that physical distance equals safety. Last year, a 22-year-old named Leo was trying to put some distance between himself and a complicated past. He found a vacation rental on a tiny island off the coast of Maine. The cottage was a single room right on the shoreline, and the price was suspiciously cheap. He booked it without a second thought. The reality of that environment became apparent quickly. By sunset, the day trippers boarded the last ferry back to the mainland. The island had no streetlights, no ambient neighborhood noise, and no local authorities. To make matters worse, Leo's phone charger was broken. By the time he locked the deadbolt that night, his battery was completely dead. Around 2 in the morning, Leo woke to the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps on the gravel outside. They stopped right in front of his door. A flashlight beam clicked on, sweeping through the thin curtain covering the front window. The person outside tried the handle, putting their weight into it, before pounding hard on the door. Leo crouched silently on the floor, waiting. The pounding stopped, but instead of leaving, a man's voice spoke clearly through the wood. He said, "I know you're in there, Leo." The stalker circled the cottage for the next hour before walking back toward the water, where a small outboard motor started up and faded into the distance. The next morning, Leo found heavy boot prints circling the gravel. They formed a straight line directly from his cottage to the shoreline. The person outside didn't come from the island. They traveled by boat, on that specific night, to that specific rental. Geographical isolation removes every societal safety net you rely on. When you cross the water to escape your problems, you're cutting off your only avenues of help, trapping yourself with whatever decides to follow you. That physical vulnerability becomes even more dangerous when you visit places that officially don't have a human presence. Off the coast of Nagasaki sits Hashima Island. It looks like a massive concrete battleship rising directly out of the ocean. At its peak, Hashima was one of the most densely populated places on Earth, operating as a massive coal mining facility. The coal ran out in the 1970s, and the island was abruptly abandoned. Today, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, where tourists are strictly confined to a narrow, monitored path along the seawall. A structural engineer working on a graduate thesis about concrete degradation secured a highly restricted academic permit to enter the ruined residential blocks. He was assigned a government escort named 𝗓𝗃𝗁, who laid out strict rules to stay on designated paths and remain within visual range at all times. While examining a 4th-floor corridor, the engineer noticed something strange. A distinct path had been worn through decades of settled dust, leading to a specific room at the end of the hall. Inside, an unidentifiable smell hung in the air. When he touched the concrete wall, it was noticeably warm. Thick concrete does not generate heat on its own. In a room shielded from the sun and cut off from the power grid for decades, that warmth could only come from a living source, one the official record insists does not exist. He immediately reported the warm wall and the smell to his escort. 𝗓𝗃𝗁 didn't ask a single clarifying question. He flatly refused to inspect the room, stated firmly that life on the island was impossible, and pulled out his radio to speak rapidly in Japanese. They moved to a taller residential block near the center of the island. On the 5th floor, the engineers stepped into a corner room and found a carefully arranged pile of blankets and several empty plastic water bottles. He turned around to show 𝗓𝗃𝗁 the items, but the escort had vanished. The engineer rushed back to the only stairwell they had used to come up. The landing was completely blocked by a massive pile of heavy concrete rubble that had not been there minutes before. He bolted down a different corridor, blindly navigating the labyrinth of crumbling walls. From behind him, he heard boots step out into the hallway. Multiple distinct sets of footsteps were converging on his location, matching his pace through the dark. He eventually found a secondary stairwell and sprinted across the open ground to the dock, where 𝗓𝗃𝗁 was waiting calmly by the boat, completely unfazed. If people are living inside a restricted, monitored ruin, they are being allowed to stay. The danger of an abandoned space reaches a new level when the people meant to keep you safe are the ones ensuring you stay trapped. The most disorienting threat is one that operates out of sight, right in the middle of a major metropolis. North Brother Island sits in the East River, legally off-limits and heavily overgrown, surrounded entirely by New York City. The island has a dark institutional history. It housed a quarantine hospital for infectious diseases and later operated as a rehabilitation center before being permanently abandoned to the elements. 10 years ago, a college student writing a thesis on defunct hospitals convinced two friends to kayak to the island at 2 in the morning. They pulled their boats through the tall reeds and started exploring the pitch-black ruins, eventually splitting up to cover more ground. While walking alone down a long hospital corridor, the student heard Jesse call his name from a branching room up ahead. He called out, asking where he was. A voice, sounding exactly like Jansen, replied, "In here," from a room on the left. He stepped through the doorway and swept his flashlight across the darkness. The beam hit a figure standing in the far corner. It was a person, easily 6.5 feet tall, standing perfectly still with their face pressed directly into the wall. He screamed and ran blindly towards the shoreline. He intercepted Jansen and Jesse near where they had originally split up. He realized then that Jesse had been on the complete opposite side of the complex the entire time. The voice in the hallway belonged to someone or something else. The three of them dragged their kayaks into the water in a total panic. As they paddled frantically away from the shore, a faint, distinct sound carried over the water from the dark tree line behind them. An older woman, wincing and moaning in pain. Seeking absolute isolation requires crossing the boundaries that keep you connected to the known world. When you strip away those safety nets, you leave yourself entirely defenseless against whatever already claimed the shadows.